Yeah, of course. So, hi everyone. I hope you guys had a good lunch break. Everything will be very relevant soon. But welcome back to the third inspiration hour, and we will get started. So, we will be introducing to you guys our speaker for today, who is Alison Fagan. Thank you so much for coming today. And the topic is future of food. So, that's very exciting because we just had lunch.
Some of us did.
Some of us did, but hopefully you guys can go get food afterwards. So this is Allison. So currently this is her amazing bio, and she holds a BA Hons in accountancy and HR management. She has all of these amazing degrees in like international marketing practice and dip in leadership and strategic growth. And she's also been working in the food agricultural industry for over 15 years, and that is various between like startups, established companies, government food agencies across 4 continents. Oh, wow. Alison is super passionate about sustainability and human rights in food production practices and access to quality nutrition for all people as a basic human right. And so she champions the application of STEM, which is why we're all here today to address some of the biggest challenges we actually have in our nutrition today. So without further ado, here's Alison.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. First, I wanted to say I'm so grateful to be here. I learned about AAUW through 2 very kind ladies who I go to a class with, and they told me about the program and how all of you got to be here. And I'm just so inspired by you and think it's just such a wonderful program that you're participating in. So thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to me speak about something I'm very passionate about. Alexis, is my presentation, can everyone
so if you can go ahead and share screen again.
Okay, one moment. Okay,
yes, you're all set.
Perfect. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me first. So I'm from Ireland originally, and I grew up in a small town called Mullingar, which is in the very center of Ireland. It's a small agricultural town, very green, lots of cows, a lot of dairy, and a lot of beef. When I was growing up, I always wanted to travel. I cared a lot about sustainability, and I cared a lot about food. And coming from this small town with an agricultural base, I saw firsthand a lot about how the food we eat is produced in a traditional way. When I was in school, in Ireland, the schools are still quite, girls go to all girls schools and boys go to all boys schools, and STEM wasn't really pushed that well in girls schools, unfortunately, at the time, and that's changing. But if I could go back, knowing what I know now, I would probably study molecular biology or bioengineering. So I'm very grateful for where my job has brought me, and that I have this interest in food and STEM, and that I can work in something I'm passionate about, and it allows me to travel and connect with people like yourselves. For me, food connects people. When you break bread with people, you learn about them, you learn about their culture, and we all need it. So we're all the same in that way. And why I work in food. So I started my career in more on a business side, and I chose to go to the business side of food because I care about people's health and well-being. I care very much about nature and the environment and sustainability. And I really care about people reaching to food and water and have all their basic needs met, so that then they can focus on what really matters to them and achieve their goals. And then when I was a child, I had a book, and it was called In Search of the Last Dodo. And it was one of my favorite books. And it was about greedy King Glut, and he loved to eat eggs. And he was determined to try the one type of egg he'd never had. And that was a dodo egg. And there was only one left in the entire world. So when I was a kid, I thought I'd find a dodo. And of course, dodos are extinct. So it's a really interesting parable for today to think about how we keep consuming things that we know are probably finite, and where can we use science and technology and engineering and math to maybe create better solutions in how we produce the food we eat today. So my presentation touches on many things and trends happening in the world of food. Food is a huge topic. I love food. I love reading about food. I love food history. I love growing my food, and I love eating with my friends and family. So I hope you enjoy the presentation, and if there's anything you'd like to know afterwards, I'll share my details and you can reach out. So what I'm really going to talk about are some of the biggest trends happening in the world of food at the moment. And we're coming out of, well, seem to be coming out of a pandemic in COVID-19, and that's changed a lot for many, many people in how we live, how we consume, and how we think about ourselves and the future. So the areas I've chosen to focus on are some of the top priorities we're seeing in the world of food right now and the changes in consumer habits. So the first thing that's come out of the year that just passed is a term that's called value-based buying. And that means people are eating things based on their beliefs. So whether it's equality, diversity, climate change, people are choosing to consume things that they think matter or do good. The term I use for this, and I fit in it, it's a conscientious consumer. So it means when you spend money on something, you spend it on what matters to you, and you're kind of voting with your wallet. You consider where your products come from and who benefits from when you buy these products. My own job now, I work for a company called Ornua, and the brand is called Kerrygold. It's an Irish company, and the reason I work for them is because our owners are the farmers. So our profits go directly back to the farmers and the farmer families, and all of the farms are family owned. So we've about 14,000 small family farms, and there's 3 generations of family often working on a farm, and I know that they directly benefit from my work. So that matters to me. The other piece in value-based buying that we're seeing after some of the events in the year that just passed is people are supporting more minority-owned businesses. There's more new products, and they're supporting more people from more diverse backgrounds. And this is great because it's giving representation, and it's also giving people the opportunity to try new things. The other wonderful thing about this more diversity of food is that culinary traditions tend to be very important to all cultures. And we learn a lot about each other, understanding our flavors and our ingredients, and it teaches us a lot about what grows well where. And there's also huge health benefits to some of these new products that we're seeing. As we look at the world and how it's adapting and growing and changing and where power is. So if you look at the world towards 2050, Nigeria is going to be one of the largest populations in the world. There's estimates, right now it's the number 7 largest country in the world, and it could be anywhere between 4 and 5 in the next 30 years. They have a very young population. The average age is 18 years old, and 52% of the population are urban. And they're actually becoming a cashless economy very quickly, so using things like fintech for their buying habits. And their GDP is growing at 3 times the rate of a developed country. So it's very important too to learn about these countries that are growing and the people, because there's a lot of potential in the future to service and help these communities. So right now, the way the world is, they think that GDP, which is global domestic product, is going to grow 130% between now and 2050. But of that, so the G7 countries, which are the developed countries that we're in, we're growing at about half of the pace of what are called the E7 countries, which are emerging markets. So today in the world, the US is number 3, and that's going to fall back to 4 or 5, and countries like India, China, Mexico, Nigeria are going to take over as the larger economies of the world. So understanding the demographics and the culture, the cuisine, the consumer, and the dietary needs of some of these cultures is very, very important. The types of diet we eat, sometimes people from other nations, they're more prone to things like lactose intolerance, or they have more gluten sensitivity. So there's a lot to be mindful of, considering how different cultures want to eat and providing the right products for wellness for the future. It's also very exciting to see more balance in where the world's power is, and everyone contributing a bit more. But what we do need to make sure with these economies is that they grow sustainably, that their people have access to proper nutrition, they have enough water, they have health care, they need infrastructure. And that's where we need really great, smart, and ambitious people like everyone in the room today to come up with solutions to make this a reality. So the next thing that I'm going to touch on is one of the biggest things we're seeing in food today and from consumers is people are starting to really care about the environment. And I'm very happy about this, but I'm also sad about it because there's so many things happening right now that are making people feel worried and concerned. So the pandemic has really boosted this concern from consumers around the sustainability of our food production practices. And when we really think about COVID-19, a pandemic has been predicted for quite a few years. It just, nobody really, I think rather than prevention over cure, there was a bit of waiting to see when will it happen, and we've all lived through it. So now there's a huge gap, for researchers in things like virology. The food industry itself, it's a very antibiotic heavy industry, particularly meat and dairy production. So 70% of all of the antibiotics sold in the US actually are fed to farm animals. And that's because they live in very close conditions in sheds. They're prone to getting sick. So they're given the antibiotics to stop the animals getting sick. But what's happening to people as a result of that is there's antibiotic resistance. So the bacteria evolves, and this is leading to things like superbugs. The development of antibiotics was a huge breakthrough for humans and human health. And if we were to have, this antibiotic resistant bacteria and superbugs, that's very dangerous for human health generally, and particularly vulnerable people. So we need to find ways of producing food using less antibiotics. The other thing we're all seeing, and I think if we're all in California, we've noticed the drought. I think the wildfires last year, we're seeing more and more changes to our seasons, and it's difficult to deny that we're living in a time where we need to really look at how we live and how we find more balance. The majority of food products we currently consume from the supermarket, they come in plastic packaging that's often not recyclable. And every single piece of plastic you or I have ever used in our life is still there. It doesn't biodegrade, it's in landfill. So if we think about all the little touch points of plastic every day in our lives, are there better materials we can develop? And where can we use less or reuse when we can? And some good news in food around material sciences. There have been some incredible breakthroughs in the last few years. I've been on a project looking for our business because dairy products are a live product. So it's difficult to get the right type of packaging, but there's a company in Canada with some very smart people, and they've developed, I think it's a blue film, they call it, and it's actually made from an enzyme from shellfish, crab shell, I believe. And right now, they developed it initially for the seafood industry, and you could wrap fish in this out at sea, and it adds 9 weeks of healthy shelf life to the fish product without even freezing the fish once. So that we approach them, and they're looking at that technology for cheese. So it doesn't work for cheese right now because people have shellfish allergies, but they're applying the science and they're developing a new material. So that's really exciting. And then I know there was some really smart researchers in Stanford last year, and they've just put in for a patent, and they've developed a potential packaging for cheese that's made out of casein. So it's a component of cheese that isn't actually the casein isn't high value, so this would add value, and your cheese packaging would actually be edible, and it works with the live product. And there's another company in Mexico who've developed a new spray that you just spray on fresh fruit and vegetables. It's very natural. I don't know the exact secret recipe, but they put in a patent, and that can add up to 8 weeks shelf life on fresh fruit and vegetables. So there are brilliant people out there doing huge things that address things like waste and landfill, and this is all part of the great science going into food right now. Another big trend we're seeing is climate-friendly diets, and this is a huge area, and often the topic of sustainability can be almost overwhelming because people can get very focused on carbon or on water or on the plastics, but there's a whole host of stakeholders, and you need to understand sustainability at every level. And my own view is sometimes people try to get everything right, and we can't get everything right. And what really makes the change is if we each do what we can ourselves. So small changes by individuals combined together have a huge impact. So some of these diets that people take on are very extreme, and some people do them to a smaller level, but every little bit helps. So just to kind of give you a bit of a perspective on the world and how people eat right now. So if we're going to talk about meat, today we eat 3 times more meat than we did 50 years ago. So the whole world, we eat about 340 million tons of meat every year at current demand and what people can afford to buy. What we eat most of are pigs and chickens. Pigs are very intelligent animals. I don't know if anyone's ever been on a farm or hung around with pigs, but they're smarter than dogs. And chickens are also very intelligent, and they form social bonds, and they get very distressed when their pecking order or hierarchy is thrown out of sync. And for a perspective, I think from California, there's so many statistics, but I think about water a lot living here, because growing up in Ireland, it rained and it rained and it rained, and I always wished it wouldn't rain anymore. And now in California, it doesn't rain, and I wish for the rain. So I really notice the lack of rain here. But when you eat 1 chicken dinner, to produce 1 chicken is the equivalent of 30 full baths of water. So I like to try and have like an idea of how much energy and resources going into how we consume. In the world right now, we eat 80 billion animals a year, and there's about 7.8 billion people on the planet. So we eat about just over 10 animals per person a year. And as the world continues to grow towards 2050, the world population is meant to be 15.6 billion. So that means we need to double how much meat we produce just to meet current demand by 2050. But a lot of that growth in population, that's happening in developing countries where people have been poorer, but they're growing their wealth, the middle class. So as people get wealthier, they consume more meat, because meat's a really essential part of a healthy diet from the perspective of protein and B12. It can be very good for human growth. Right now, the largest meat producer in the world is Asia, and Asia produces 40 to 45% of the world's meat today. In 1961, it only produced 12%, so that's a 15-fold increase in about 60 years. And if we see the population double again, we need to think about that demand and how do we produce that. I have a question. Kaya, is it? Am I pronouncing your name right? I think you're muted.
Oh yeah, there we go. I just got the thing. So now that scientists are like growing food and even meat in labs, how is that going to benefit the environment?
I love your question. You're ahead of me. So I'm a huge fan of growing meat in labs, and I have some slides on that a little bit further down. And I think that's a big solution, and that's my passion area. So if you don't mind waiting, I'll get to that in a couple of slides time. Is that good?
I muted her again, so you're good.
Okay. Was there another question there? I thought I saw another hand go up.
There may be several hands go up, but I would encourage everybody to hold your questions until the end, please.
Well, I'm very excited that Kaya knows about where I'm going, because I love this technology, and I like that someone else knows about it today here. I feel surrounded by similar minds. So yeah, right now Asia is producing about 45% of the world's meat, and that's where a lot of population growth is. But when we look at how people consume, so in the US currently people eat about 100 kilograms of meat per year, whereas in India people eat about 5 kilograms. So we also need to look at how much people are eating based on their wealth versus what they will want to eat in 20, 30 years time. There's another thing we consider in food, and it's called the feed to grain ratio. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with it, but it talks about it's the efficiency of the conversion of when we feed an animal and what that turns into for humans to consume. So if you need to grow corn and how much water and inputs go into that corn, and you're going to feed the corn to a cow or a chicken versus feeding that to a person, what are the pros and cons and impact of that? How much land is required? How much water? How much time? How much space? Bella, can you unmute Bella, or should I continue? Dr. Mimi?
You should be able to unmute Bella.
Bella.
Oh yeah, I was wondering, how much percent did you say that the world of the meat comes from Asia?
Right now, today, they are responsible for 40 to 45%. And then the EU and the US are only about 15% production right now. So when we look at this concept of feed to grain ratio, we need to think about where does the land come from to feed these animals what they need. And then certain animals have evolved to eat particular types of diets. So cows, for example, would be called ruminants, and they naturally are grazers on pasture land. So their natural type of food would be grass. But because of climate and where cows are often raised, they're not places where grass naturally grows or in enough abundance, or there isn't enough space for the cattle. So they get fed things like corn and soy, but the cow's digestive system isn't designed to digest the cellulose in the corn and soy. So as a result, the cows have a harder time digesting these products, and they produce more methane. So what you feed the animal can have an impact on the sustainability of the product you use, and also where the land for growing the corn and soy comes from has an impact. So I work in Latin America in my job, and one of the challenging debates we have right now is a lot of Brazil. There's a lot of deforestation to grow corn and soy to feed cattle, and people can get quite upset or concerned because the Amazon is in Brazil, and we don't like to see the rainforest cut down. But there has to be a balance. So, in the food world, we call Brazil the lungs of the world, but countries also need to have the ability to develop and feed themselves. So if we don't want Brazil to continue to cut down large amounts of rainforest, how can we incentivize countries like Brazil not to? So should other countries, for example, pay Brazil a conservation tax to preserve the Amazon so they could put that money into development for people? And these are some of the big questions we think about, because it can be easier, comfortable when you live in a developed country and have access to all these lovely, comfortable privileges, to feel very challenged by what you see happening in other countries. But you also always have to try and put yourself in other people's shoes and consider the why, and then what other solutions do we have. So the other really nice thing happening in food right now is, I don't know why my notes are up there, is this rise of what's called regenerative agriculture. And I'm not sure how familiar everyone in the room is with regenerative agriculture, but what it really is it's a form of agriculture where the focus is on conservation and a rehabilitation approach to food and the farming system. So some of the big things that are focused on with regenerative agriculture are soil regeneration, increased biodiversity, improved water management, enhanced ecosystems, supporting what's called biosequestration. So sequestration is when you do things like plant more trees to absorb carbon emissions. So you try to create a balance. There's a big focus on increased biodiversity, so the types of birds and insects that will be on the land, and that everything has a place and a symbiosis in nature. Everything has a purpose there. And really the core essence of regenerative agriculture is about resilience to climate change and strengthening the health and vitality of a farm at all levels. So there's a type of farming called biodynamic farming. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with it, and if you're interested, there's a lovely film called The Biggest Little Farm about a couple from Santa Monica who bought a dead piece of land in California and turned it into this beautiful biodynamic farm, which is a really good example of what can be done. Is it Giolana? Am I pronouncing it right?
Yes, you did. Congratulations. It says on the slide that approximately 1 pound of food per person is wasted. Does that food waste come from individuals, or does it come from major food companies, or where does it come from?
So that's my next slide. And for some reason, the notes have gone on this slide because my next one is about the war on waste. It's both. So about a third of all food produced in the US goes to waste for multiple reasons, which I'm going to touch on. But it's 30 to 40% of the food supply in the US is wasted. And a lot of it's to do with inefficiency, and a lot of it's to, I'll just switch my slide. Some of it's to do with, over probably the last 40, 50 years, supermarkets, people have gotten very used to having everything they want when they want it. We live in a convenience-based society, and people like things to look nice. So different, fruits and vegetables and things have been developed to look a very specific, very perfect way. And, when you walk into a supermarket, everything looks very beautiful, very pristine, and supermarkets spend millions, if not billions of dollars on marketing every year to try and get us to buy more. So even how things are packaged in multi-packs, in large amounts, there are very intelligent marketers who are given a lot of money to come up with ways to convince people to buy more than they need. And that's because it's all about selling, and it's about delivering profit to shareholders and producing more. And then there's also very complex things like certain government subsidies and grants that are given to farmers to incentivize growing different things at different times for all sorts of reasons. And sometimes there's too much of something, and then that needs to be sold, or it goes into a government storage facility. So these are all the challenges, and I like to look at who's doing good things, and what are some of the products coming out. So people are looking at things like upcycling. So there's this concept of ugly foods. So ugly foods are perfectly fine fruits and vegetables grown on farms, but they just don't meet the perfect measurements that the supermarkets require, because that's what they think people find aesthetically pleasing. So there's new food delivery boxes where people are selling ugly veg, or they're putting them into things like juicing, or they're going into pet food. So there's lots of uses. There's also apps where people can, and restaurants and retailers can, note when they have product that's just about to go off. So thing like best before dates, expiry dates. Best before says best before. It doesn't say gone off after. And people can be very sensitive to best before dates. And I know people who throw things out when they're within a week of their best before date because they're afraid of it. So we need to think about the terminology. In the past, there were laws that made it illegal to give away waste food because there's a lot there's risk of, you know, if a consumer got sick eating something they were given for free, they could potentially sue the company that gave it away for free. So there's litigation, and that makes things very complicated. But certain countries like France, for example, has made it illegal for supermarkets to throw out food. So they need to find an alternative way to use it up. There's a startup in Ireland, it's called Food Cloud, I believe, and it's 2 women from Cork, and this connects retailers with food charities, so that the retailer in the app can let a food charity know when they're going to have XYZ ready, and then the food bank or food charity can pick up that food so it goes to a good cause. And this is again using science and STEM to connect and bring the communication that this is here and reduce waste. And certain retailers are doing things like creating areas where the food is closer to its best before date, and they just sort of highlight it there in store, and it's better value, and it's encouraging people to use that up rather than throw it out. So it's just about shifting consumer mindsets around what's good and what's not.
Alison, just really quickly, if I could just remind everyone again to hold off on your questions because Alison might be presenting some material on the questions you may have. So if you could just hold off till the end, that would be great.
Thanks. So the next one is kind of an exciting one. This one is exciting for me. Again, being from Ireland, Ireland's an island surrounded by seaweed, and we don't really have a seaweed industry. So people are looking at other products we don't use that grow naturally and often have great health benefits. So I love kelp. Kelp is like a superfood. It's got all that great marine minerals in it. And then one of the really interesting things, you know, and this is something I love when people make scientific discoveries accidentally. So it's been discovered that if you feed a small amount of seaweed to cows in their diet, it can reduce their methane emissions by 82%, which is huge. And this was discovered by accident by a farmer in Newfoundland in Canada who let his cows go down to the beach. Cows will go down to the beach and they'll lie down and sunbathe and have a good time, but they were eating seaweed. And he noticed they were very, very, very healthy and their coats were really shiny. And he started with a vet looking at this, and this has been discovered. So there's a huge research area now in incorporating kelp into animal feed, but it's also there for people. So there's lots of interesting stuff happening, looking at what else grows out there that we don't eat, and should we be trying new things. So now this is where I get really excited. So this is called the Next Gen Plant-Based. So this is about tech-driven innovations, some plant-based and then lab-grown meat. So lab-grown meat, some of you clearly know and some don't. It's when we take a cell from an animal and you feed the cell a medium, and cells can expand infinitely. And then you grow them in a bioreactor, and you basically create meat without killing any animal. So I think I mentioned how many billions of animals we consume every year at current demand. This technology could bring those billions down to thousands. And then you just have a couple of thousand animals. And those animals don't need to be inside in sheds. They can be in fields. And you don't need to be taking huge amounts of land to feed billions of animals and huge amounts of water. You also, it's a harmless, pain-free way of harvesting the cells. You can take a swab. And there's so much to this technology. I think it's the most exciting thing happening in the world right now. So I'm very happy to talk about it. So it's clean meat, it's conflict and cruelty free. It's a pretty new science. So the first guy who really went after it, he's called Professor Martin Kjorn, and he's a cardiologist at the University of Maastricht. And his favorite food was a hamburger. So he loved eating burgers with his friends, but he also cared a lot about sustainability. And at the time, his research was based on growing stents, for people needing heart surgery. And he thought, could I take that technology and apply it to growing meat? So he technically grew the world's first lab-grown burger. And at the time, it was called the most expensive burger in the world. It was cooked by a famous chef called Heston Blumenthal, who is an English chef who is a big proponent of molecular gastronomy. And it only cost $350,000. So not the average burger. But like all new technology, it's very expensive. A lot of money needs to go into the research and development. And people like Sergey Brin from Google and Bill Gates thought this was great and they invested in it. So that was in about 2013 that that burger was cooked, and we're now in 2021. And this year is the first year that this type of protein has gone on sale in the world. So Israel and Singapore have legalized this, and people, you can eat it in a restaurant there. The price, so you can now get a chicken fillet for $7 in Israel, which isn't that bad compared to $350,000. And a chicken nugget in Singapore is about 17 Singaporean dollars. So this is the prices coming down as this grows. California is one of the hubs of this technology in the world. You've some of the best universities in the world looking at food research here. Cal Poly, UC Davis, UC San Diego have a lot of research here. So if you're interested in this technology, you're in the most exciting place in the world for it. And then the other huge innovation, and it happened in December of 2020, was a company called Aleph Farms, who is a women-owned business, and they're partnered with the Technion Israel Institute of Technology, and they developed the first 3D printed ribeye. So they used the technology and then they bioprinted a ribeye steak. The price of that isn't out yet, but these things are coming to market very, very soon.
And really quickly, Alison, you have around 4 minutes until the Q&A session. I just want to give you a notice.
Okay, then I'll fly along. So
okay.
The other thing we're seeing is a lot of milk without cows. So there's a really interesting company in San Francisco called Perfect Day. I'm going to go more quickly, and if there's anything you're interested in, you can message me after and I can send you details. Then there's this company called Just Egg, which was created by a guy called Josh Chetnick, who was a sociologist who went to Africa and saw how many people suffered from lack of access to food and malnutrition, and he used mung beans to create the same texture as traditional scrambled eggs. And he's now the CEO of the Good Meat Co. He still owns Just, and the Good Meat Co. are the company that are selling the cell-based chicken in Singapore. So here you've got Just, you've got Blue Nalu. So Blue Nalu are in San Diego. There's a lot of women on that team as well, and they're going to be ready to go to market next January with the world's first seafood. And then there's Aleph that I mentioned. There's more and more plant-based products coming out, and they're getting more and more advanced and using things like mushrooms, and they're using pea protein, and the nutrition profile of these products is much, much closer to that of real meat products. So that's great news for people who don't like to eat meat. And then this one blows my mind. So there's a company using CRISPR technology, and they are making dinosaur and mammoth steaks. So my view is that maybe someday I will get to see a dodo, because if someone can make a woolly mammoth steak, then this technology can basically do anything. I've never wanted to eat a dinosaur myself, but I'm sure maybe I would if it was there, because it never crossed my mind that we could do this. And the other thing that they think this technology will be used for is to create what's called like designer meats. So you could take the best part of a steak, or the best part of, you could get duck and steak and make some sort of stuck, I don't know. And you know, it's limitless what could be done with this technology, and even enhancing the nutrition profiles. You could add iron to chicken. There are many ways of growing it. So it's kind of mind-blowing what can be done if this scales, and I believe it will. There's more and more advanced vegan companies looking more like meat, opening up butcher shops. And then we're seeing another really big movement, which is the grow it yourself movement. People are doing more growing at home. There's really nice products that makes it easy for you to have nice salads or herbs. I know one of my pandemic projects was called a gutter garden. And my partner and I, we bought gutters for $5 and grew what we could and saw what went well. So we had like chard and herbs and squash, and then we got like hummingbirds coming by and bees and butterflies. So people are doing that more and more, and it's a great way to learn what grows well where you live. And then another huge area is about, it's what's called nutraceuticals. And this is about your food being more than just food. It's like a hybrid of pharma and food. So Nestle are the biggest food company in the world, and their headquarters are in Lucerne in Switzerland. And all of their current R&D and investment is in this area of nutraceuticals, really bringing wellness into the products we consume. And often from a very natural way. So things that may help people with anxiety or to sleep better or feel calmer, using herbs and teas, so that we have lots of benefits from the things we do consume. And the other big area there is in immunity. So probiotics, prebiotics, gut health, lots of things to help us, again, when we're consuming lots of antibiotics, to go the inverse and try and look at preventative regenerative medicine in how we consume is a big part of development in food today. And again, looking at all these plants that we know less about potentially, and their uses and how we integrate them into the foods we produce. The other big one is in early life nutrition. So there's a lot of studies around getting really good nutrition when you're in vitro, and in the first 2 years of your life can hugely impact your health outcomes for the rest of your life. So companies are really looking at this and making sure that kids get the best start. Gut health is big again. Superfoods, kombuchas, probiotics, which I touched on. Also looking at skin. So you are what you eat, bringing wellness inside, and it'll show on the outside. So this is called nutri-cosmetics, big area for people. And again, sugar reduction is people are constantly looking at sugar reduction and what other products are there to give people the sweetness they want without some of the negative health impacts of consuming a high sugar diet. People are drinking less alcohol. They're looking at more teas, more herbal blends. And then if I don't know if I have time, Alexis, or not, I can continue or I can wrap up there. The last piece I was going to go into is dining on demand. And what that really goes into is how things like robotics and apps are being used to replace people and services. So that's a big STEM area too. But I'm very happy to share the presentation after if people want it for reference.
Yeah, so we do, we have entered our Q&A session already. So if you don't mind, we'll just hold off on this last section, and then we can share this presentation with all the campers after camp. So
cool.
So if anybody has any questions, now is the time to raise your hand and we'll call on you. So we'll start off with Josie.
Okay, so if the meat that's grown in labs, if that's still, if it works, which I have no doubt it will, what about the farmers? Will they be out of job?
That's a great question. And, that's one of the big challenges getting these things to market. We have to think about how are things done now versus the future. So one of the areas that's being looked at is with these farmers. One is those that may have special cows like Wagyu or something. So they'll be paid a license or a patent fee for the cells of their cows. The other suggestion is, well, what should we do with this land? How would it help? So things like carbon sequestration. So you could pay government grants to farmers, for example, rather than subsidies for corn and soy, you could pay them to turn their land into wildlife corridors or into forests or parks, recreation things, and then they will make income off their land that way. But there's many jobs where technology comes in and replaces, like it's a bit like when Uber came and taxi drivers weren't happy, or when the car came and the people who had the horses weren't happy. So change comes and you need to adapt. But I think it's very important to upskill and train people as this change is coming. And robotics and AI are going to change the world for all of us massively, and we need to think about what skills the world does need. So there are some of the big questions. How do we pay the farmers, or how do they continue to make money? And my own view is creating these wildlife corridors, because again, then there's more forestation in countries that in the past deforested for agricultural land. But again, I think you guys here and we all need to come up with these great answers of what could we do.
Okay, thank you for that. And then next, Sienna.
So I had like one kind of longer question and then one that's kind of shorter. But the first, but I was curious, can you foresee any like reasons why some people wouldn't want to eat the lab-made foods or the new like plant-based foods?
Yeah.
And then kind of how would you refute those, I guess?
So to me, it's personal choice. Food is very, very personal to people. And I eat meat now. And when I was a teenager, I was a vegan. So I've thought about this a lot. But I'm very selective about the meat I eat, and I will eat this lab-grown meat because I'm so excited about it, and I know a lot about food. I work in it. But I think it's very important to let people know this is here and let them make their choices. This won't change overnight, but I think longer term it will. And the important thing to me to have these conversations is, one, to listen to other people and their feelings and their views. It's also very important to not be condescending or make the science too complicated for everyone to understand. So companies need to be transparent about their practices and open and willing to show people. And the companies doing it so far right now, particularly the ones in Israel, they're inviting people in to come and see the process and learn how it works. And really it's a form of fermentation. So, if people like drinking microbrewery beer, or if they like yogurt or kimchi, they're all forms of fermentation, and it's just helping people understand that the science is good. There are people who are afraid. They say, I don't want to eat food grown in a lab. But a lot of the food people eat today is grown in a lab. They just don't know it. And there's often a saying that if abattoirs, so abattoirs are where animals are killed, that if abattoirs had glass walls, people probably wouldn't eat meat. And that's why a lot of this production happens outside of urban zones and where people are exposed, because it's a difficult thing to watch. But ultimately, people need to eat and make their own choices. And I think that's up to how much access people have to information, and all change takes time.
Yeah, and I just want to add really quickly, GMOs are common for food that everyone doesn't notice, that, genetically modified organisms, they're from the lab. They were genetically modified to be more perfect, to be more shiny, like fruits and veggies. So that's one point.
Yeah, and my big fear about this is that this could go the way of GMOs. So one of the, I think, great mistakes in the GMO debate was Monsanto came in and they were very, very heavy-handed in their communication, and then people became very afraid of GMOs and called them Frankenfoods and weren't willing to have open discussions. So I think it's really, really important that the scientific and the food community collaborate and make sure we market this in a positive way. There are some really, really beneficial GMO products out there, and it's really a pity that they haven't been allowed to be sold, because they could help a lot of people.
Well, and isn't it true that a lot of engineered foods, genetically modified foods, they were modified to produce more? For instance, rice in China, wheat products, triticale, those are all genetically modified versions of the original food. So is it a messaging thing?
Alison, I don't think we can hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was saying it is a messaging thing, and I think the scientific community needs a big marketing PR engine behind it. So there's a rice called golden rice, where they took a gene out of a carrot, because carrots are high in vitamin A, and put it into rice. And there's parts of Africa where people have degenerative eye diseases, and this could really, really help, but it couldn't be sold. So it's a huge communication piece. And most of the food we eat today, kiwis, bananas, all of these things are hybrids, and they've had radioactivity put towards them. If anyone has a pet dog or pet cat, they're technically genetically modified. So I actually think the term GMO needs to be recoined and called bioenhanced or something else. There needs to be a new word to reopen the conversation, because there's been so much damage done, and now there's a whole industry with a lot of money around labeling things non-GMO, and that industry isn't going to die quickly. So
I mean, it's the same industry that labeled things fat-free, naturally produced, you know, just trying to get people to buy more of their product by changing the messaging.
Exactly. Yeah. So we need, again, great minds and great women here to come up with solutions and think about these things, and how can we make people feel safe, and how can we make people trust science and know that it's a good thing.
Okay, we actually have a lot of other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the questions. Alexis, go ahead.
So you said that like chicken nuggets were $17, like one chicken nugget or a full meal in Japan?
So it's Singapore, and it's Singaporean dollars, and I haven't checked the conversion today, so I'd need to go, but it's a meal, but this is the lab-grown one. So it's so new. It only got legalized in January of this year, and they have it in like very high-end hotels. But Singapore is a very expensive place anyway, because it's an island and they have to import all of their food. So they actually aren't very food secure, and they have a very progressive program. They want to be able to produce 30% of their food by 2030, because they understand the risks of not being able to produce any of their food. So they're big advocates of technology in food.
Okay. Also,
Okay.
what are there any cons to the lab-grown meat?
One of the cons, and that's a great question, the bioreactors require quite a lot of energy to run, but you know, in time we could use clean energy to run them. I mean, and that's really the only con. And also, you know, right now people are thinking about it like, oh, we'd need to build a huge bioreactor and then truck the meat from Idaho to California the way current meat is. It's like, no, every city could have multiple bioreactors, so you could remove actually having to transport meat the distance, and you remove all of that energy required to transport it. In time, they believe that people will be able to have their own little bioreactor at home and 3D print your own steak. They think we'll have that technology in about 15 years. There's some really fun. There's a website. It's called Bistro in Vitro, and it's again a Dutch guy. It's just fun, and you can go in and you can invent things, and it's like a restaurant menu, and you pick what you would eat, and it tells you what type of a cell-based consumer you are. There's wonderful TED Talks. There's a guy called Paul Shapiro. He was head of the Humane Society of the United States. He's written this book. I actually have it here. It's called Clean Meat. It's a really good book if you're interested in this technology. There's loads of information out there.
Okay, Griseldi, go ahead.
Do you think that composting is an efficient way of getting rid of food waste, or is there any other alternatives?
I think composting is fantastic. I have a thing, it's called a little pig, and it's a mini biodigester. So if you can compost, if you have the facilities and space, I encourage everyone doing their own little bit brings great change.
Okay, Emma, go ahead.
Oh, so I was wondering if the same like cell regeneration technique can be used for meat, can it also be used for like vegetables and fruits?
There is someone doing something, I think, with asparagus. I mean, I think it can be. I mean, technically, fruit and veggies kind of grow from a cell anyway, because they grow from a seed. But if you're talking about the space to grow them, there's people looking at things like vertical farming and aquaponics and more circular farming. I think the big thing about when we grow fruits and veggies, mostly we consume them directly. When it's for meat, it's that you have to feed the animal to feed us. So it's a different sort of efficiency or supply chain to getting our food.
So it's almost time for our breakout room. So we're just going to take one more question, but Allison is going to go around the rooms. So if you have questions for her and happen to see her, you can ask her there. Christoph, you're going to be our last question.
Right. So I did this project at my school, and it was about you doing your own thing to like help stop like global emissions and stuff.
If there's someone with your mic on, please turn it off.
Yeah, sorry, Christoph, there's a little bit of interference. Could you speak up a little bit, please?
All right, so like.
And for the rest of you, while she's typing that question, we're going to be going into breakout rooms. And then we'll be discussing this speaker, and then I will be bringing you back into the main room. So we're going to go into breakout rooms for about 15 minutes or so for you to get situated with your coaches, and then we'll come back.